Hey Ed, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Hey, it's a pleasure always talking to you. You always bring something to the table. Hey, I just wanted to do this quick demo with you and about Lens and how it helps the Kubernetes community and the Kubernetes developers as well as ops guys. Why don't you do a quick introduction about yourself, and then we can kick it off from there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sounds good. So I'm Edward Ianel. I am on Team Lens, and I'm focused on growth and developer relations here at Team Lens. And couldn't be more excited to be here with you today. My thoughts are maybe we start off with a presentation, really quickly explaining why we develop Lens, the value Lens brings to the developers, those operators, and so forth. And then we can transition into a demo. What does that sound like to you?
Yeah, that sounds perfect. I think let's. You want to share your screen and show me the presentation?
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's start by sharing my screen real quick, and then I will ask you when you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
And what do you see? You see slides?
Yeah, I see the Kubernetes IDE.
Excellent, excellent. Well, let's get started. So as mentioned, everyone, I'm Edward Ianel, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So today we'll be talking about Lens, the Kubernetes IDE. At a very high level, Lens gives Kubernetes users, regardless if you're a beginner or an expert, full situational awareness within your Kubernetes clusters. So jumping straight into it, I want to talk a little bit about why we developed Lens and the value it brings to the cloud native ecosystem, right? And the main reason Lens was developed is because Kubernetes is extremely complex, as we all already know. There's many different tools, service providers, dashboards, different command lines, kubectls that we all have to perform in our day-to-day responsibilities to try to ensure success when working with Kubernetes clusters. So this is really where Lens comes in. Lens is a 100% open source technology built to work with any certified Kubernetes distro, regardless if it's EKS, GKE, Minikube, K3S, K0S, and so forth. Lens works with any certified Kubernetes distro. And again, it's 100% open source and free. Our goal when building Lens and pushing it to the community is to help them improve their productivity when working with Kubernetes, right? So that's really why we built Lens, the value of Lens, and what Lens works with, which clusters it works with, and again, all certified Kubernetes distros. So let's talk a little bit about developers, and then we'll talk about operators, and then we'll take a look at the features that Lens provides our users with to make them much more productive and unpack that complexity within Kubernetes. So as we all know, developers are quite busy. They're working on proprietary code. They're working within a IDE like VS Code. They're utilizing terminals. Then they need to push it to a CI/CD pipeline and get it onto a Kubernetes service. So there's many different steps a developer may have to take when working with Kubernetes, right? And it's a much more cumbersome process than many may think. This is where Lens comes in. Lens is going to allow developers to understand how their code and their deployment is currently performing on that cluster, on that Kubernetes service. So they'll get observability, they'll view the deployment, they'll be able to test that deployment, and of course, through Lens, they'll be able to troubleshoot that particular deployment. So that's where Lens comes in. It comes in at the end of their cycle and at the end of their processes that they may be following, and it gives them more of an insight into their deployment. Then they have the observability, testing, and troubleshooting. So that's where Lens sits in for developers. Now, operators and site reliability engineers actually have a different day-to-day activities in life, as we can all imagine, right? And a lot of their responsibilities have to do with daily operations around their Kubernetes clusters. So first things first, they'll check the health and the status of their Kubernetes clusters. They may be working with 1, 10, 15, many different Kubernetes clusters, all the way from production to proof of concept, development, and so forth. Then they'll take a look at the events of that cluster. What is happening within my Kubernetes cluster while I was away? Is there a pod down? Is a deployment failing? What is actually happening within that cluster? Then they can take a look, and I touch on this just a little bit, at that lifecycle management. For example, I see there's a drop in a file system, right? That's going to tell me that something is happening and I need to go investigate, right? And that's kind of where we begin leveraging Lens. And then you'll do a little bit of troubleshooting in your cluster if there are some errors, like, for example, your file system dropping. So Lens is a tool for operators, site reliability engineers, where they can actually very easily view the performance of multiple Kubernetes clusters. Because again, it works with multiple Kubernetes clusters, various different distros, all that are certified by the CNCF Foundation.
Nice, amazing. So it Lens itself, it's not just an IDE, but it's also a visualization tool, as well as, like you said, observability, and it allows you to kind of have that single pane of glass for your multiple clusters. That means you can manage your kube context file, um, all in one place.
Exactly. That is the magic that Lens brings our users, right? It's exactly what you just mentioned. The ability to view and have that full observability or full situational awareness into multiple Kubernetes clusters, not just one. So
Right.
that's spot on. Here on this screen, I like to always show this. And the reason I show this is I really want to thank our community here, the cloud native ecosystem in the community. We are the self-proclaimed most popular Kubernetes IDE, and we have some stats to back that up as well, right? So as of June 9th of this year, so this is somewhat outdated, about 2 months old, we have over 250,000 users currently and over 15,000 GitHub stargazers. Very interesting, very cool thing to see here. And again, I just want to thank the community on behalf of myself and Team Lens and everything we've worked on. We just want to thank the community for this amazing growth that we've seen. We could not be here without them.
It's an amazing community, Kubernetes and CNCF, hats off.
Absolutely. So I think we talked about this already quite a bit, the Lens overview, and you explained it in such a beautiful way, right? It's that full observability into multiple Kubernetes clusters. So we won't touch on this slide too much. The one things I do want to mention here is Lens works for any Kubernetes user, whether you're a novice and you're just beginning, or if you're an expert and you've been working with Kubernetes all the time, right? And this is the value that we're trying to bring to the community as well, because many people are learning Kubernetes day after day, and many people are working with Kubernetes day after day. Is there a tool that both of these groups of people can leverage to be more successful, to be more productive, to be more efficient, right? And that's really where Lens is coming in.
And I just want to add to what you said, right? Anybody who's about to get into the world of Kubernetes, from a Linux administration standpoint or from a development background standpoint, in the beginning phase of the learning, it's overwhelming. There's so many moving parts and complexity with Kubernetes, and I feel that having that visualization of looking at the pods, looking at the services through a UI will really simplify in their heads the concepts and understanding of Kubernetes. And it's a great tool, I feel, for beginners to install and play with their cluster, kind of visualize it.
Absolutely. It's like how to get up and running with Kubernetes easily without the huge headache of leveraging many different command lines, right? And learning kubectl and all these different things. I mean, Lens is going to allow you to get started quickly with Kubernetes. So you're spot on. Absolutely. So now let's talk about some Highland features here, if you don't mind, and then we can go into the demo. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. So the first of the features, and this is actually brought to us with Lens 5. Lens 5 was introduced back in June of this year, and it was our most significant release. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. But the first really unique feature that's helping users be more productive, work more efficiency with Kubernetes and cloud native technologies is the unified catalog. The unified catalog should be thought of as your cloud native directory. And what do I mean by that? I mean, here within the catalog, you can bring your Kubernetes clusters, you can bring your web links, and you can bring your Lens spaces. We'll talk about spaces more in a minute. But the point of this is you have this beautiful directory where you can actually search, filter, and categorize your different resources that you're leveraging with cloud native within the cloud native ecosystem. So right now we're only servicing for clusters, web links, and Lens spaces. But in the future, we plan to bring other resources to the unified catalog that will work on top of Lens. So as of right now, as mentioned, clusters, web links, and Lens spaces, but we do have a roadmap where we're planning on adding more capabilities to the catalog, more resources that can live within the catalog.
So what do you mean by web links?
Yeah, that's a great question. So within Lens itself, we've introduced web links, and web links, long story short, you can just think of them as hyperlinks, but they're not hyperlinks. So if you take a look at this bar on the left-hand side in this image, you can actually have a command or a click that will bring you to a browser in just a second. And the reason why this is valuable is it's going to help, let's just say, beginners with Kubernetes leverage different documentation pages very quickly. So for example, and we'll see this in the demo, I have web links on top of my Lens desktop application that takes me to a kubectl cheat sheet.
Got it.
So yeah. So when I'm working within my K0s cluster and there's something that I'm having trouble with, I can use a web link that I'm always referencing, maybe kubectl cheat sheet, documentation pages, and so forth, and I can access that very quickly.
It can also be your services links just for you to do a quick test if you do the deployment. Yeah.
Exactly. That is spot on. So very cool. Moving along, we have two neat features here as well. The first is hotbars. We kind of just touched on this a bit, but the hotbars is the main navigation of Lens, the desktop application. This is going to allow you to have these hot links that allow you to move quickly between cluster and cluster. So here, if we take a look at this hotbar, and we'll see it in the demo as well, I can have 10 different clusters here that I can provide icons to and a naming convention that allows me to very easily understand which cluster that is, or web link, or space, right? So if I want to switch from a production cluster to, let's say, a development cluster, I can do so very quickly leveraging the hotbar. Again, the main navigation of Lens.
Yep. Very cool.
Yep. Yeah, it's very neat. And then we have command palette. Command palette, long story short, it's keyboard shortcuts. If I want to add a Kubernetes cluster directly to Lens, I can leverage our keyboard without having to click through the UI. Quite simple.
Nice.
The next one, and this is a very interesting feature brought to Lens as well, and we'll be taking a look at this, is the pre-built-in Prometheus. Lens leverages Prometheus to actually allow our users to get a graphical interface or a graph that shows us how our cluster is performing in the last hour. This follows us around for every single Kubernetes object. So meaning here in this diagram, we can see that I'm getting a granular view of a deployment. Then I can see when it was created, the namespace, the labels, and so forth, right? And how it's performing in the last hour. So it's extremely useful for our users to very quickly, especially if you're on that operational side, how we talked about seeing cluster performance, events, and so forth. This is going to allow us to do that.
I have a quick question here,
Sure.
Ed. So, like, as what Interas does is we kind of build these automated frameworks that encapsulates observability as part of provisioning of EKS clusters or AKS clusters or GKE clusters, whatever our clients might require. So how does an existing Prometheus deployment tie into Lens? Like, do you know how that's going to be handled?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So our Prometheus has to be switched on and off. right? So
Okay.
if you have your own Prometheus on your kubeconfig file and it's already deployed and so forth, you do not need to worry about adding, selecting our metrics within Lens itself. And I'll demonstrate that as well.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So so you can either hook up your Prometheus that comes with Lens, or I can hook up the existing deployment as well into Lens, is what I gather.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Moving along, the smart terminal, and we'll touch on this for a second here because it's so important to note. The smart terminal is quite unique. And the reason for this is when I switch from cluster to cluster, the terminal is always going to match to the correct Kubernetes cluster API version, right? That endpoint of the cluster. So I can be ensured when I switch to a GKE cluster for my K0S cluster, that terminal is matched to that correct Kubernetes cluster API version, right? So this is helping us be much more efficient. And this is really helping us work with multiple Kubernetes clusters compared to writing additional command lines, switching to cluster, and so forth. So this is going to ensure that we're always working within the correct Kubernetes cluster API endpoint.
So your client has to match your endpoint version, which makes it reliable.
Exactly.
No, it's a smart move. Yeah.
Exactly. Spot on. So this is probably one of the biggest features within Lens, right? It's allowing our users to leverage this and work with multiple Kubernetes clusters.
Nice.
Next thing, very fun thing here as well. Lens allows you to have, or Lens gives you the ability to deploy Helm charts directly to your Kubernetes cluster in the matter of seconds without having to write any command line. So it's literally a 2-click install of whatever Helm chart you're interested in. There's thousands of different repos to choose from, and you can immediately download or deploy a Helm chart directly to your Kubernetes cluster. Quite simple, very cool, great for people getting started with Kubernetes as well.
Nice. So you can, I imagine that you're going to connect to the Helm repo that is available, and you can also connect to your company's Artifactory or any other Helm repo as well.
Exactly. There's thousands to choose from currently. Yes.
Okay.
So from here, we're going to talk about extensions, which is an extremely important part of Lens, especially for the community. So Lens allows us to build extensions on top of, on top of Lens, right? So for example, if I'm a startup or a smaller company and I have this beautiful tool that allows me to see vulnerabilities within a Kubernetes cluster, I can build an extension for Lens where now Lens users can leverage this beautiful technology where they can view vulnerabilities of your Kubernetes cluster. So it's twofold. One, it's really helping startups, organizations leverage our users, which is fantastic, right? And it also allows our users to leverage new technologies that they may not have touched before. Like, for example, being able to scan for vulnerabilities within our Kubernetes cluster. Currently, there's over 100 extensions, and there's 15 or so publicly made.
Nice. That's great. It's like plugins or extensions are a beautiful way to expand the open source product into the community as you find more use cases.
Exactly. And I think this is going to be a huge part of Lens and even the cloud native ecosystem where we're all really working together to provide everybody with the best tools, the best technologies to be successful, right? Because that's the goal, I think, of the community itself is let's all become better at whatever we're doing, whether it's Kubernetes or not. And that's what's so beautiful about this.
Absolutely.
Lastly, we're going to talk about Lens Spaces. And I touched on this just slightly when we're looking at the unified catalog. Now, Lens Spaces is the newest feature brought to Lens. It's actually a centralized cloud-based offering that allows our users to share Kubernetes clusters securely with colleagues. So long story short, you create a Lens space, You can add a Kubernetes cluster directly to that space, and then you can provide access to that space to a colleague, right? And currently, if you chose to do so, it would be only read only. It's always based off of your kubeconfig file and your RBAC, but a user would be able to view somebody's Kubernetes cluster. And of course, if you go into role binding and make some configuration changes, you can even get so granular where I'm giving my developers specific access to specific namespaces, like
Yep.
a monitoring namespace and so forth.
That's a very important function, because you don't want to kind of throw around or share around your kubeconfig file,
Yeah.
or put it in a common place where anybody can download it and
Access.
use it.
Exactly. And it eliminates the need for organizations to leverage VPNs and firewalls and so forth. So
Yep.
from here, what I would like to do is get into the fun stuff, right? Instead of talking about the presentation, the features and so forth, and we get into the demo, the meat of the project itself. So for everybody that's watching, we're going into the demo now, which should be fun as well.
Yeah, I'm just excited to see the product itself and play with it
Absolutely.
tonight.
Perfect. So I just launched Lens. I've already had it open, and we can immediately see, and currently what we're looking at is the overview screen of a Kubernetes cluster. This one in particular is a Minikube cluster. Real quick, I do want to mention, how do you add a cluster to Lens? So it's quite simple. There's actually two ways to do so. So within your catalog, which is this button on the top left, you would click clusters, and then you just click this add button here. This add button, there's two things that actually happen. So you can add a kubeconfig file, right, directly to here by copying and pasting. And Lens actually searches your operating system for a kubeconfig file. So if it finds a kubeconfig file when you're hitting this plus button, it's going to add it directly to the desktop application. So yeah, and this is something we're still working on and testing. And the reason for this is new with Lens 5. Previously, the only ways to add a kubeconfig file was either searching for it on your operating system, like the traditional way, and or copying and pasting it. Now what we're trying to do is remove the contingencies of trying to actually go and find your kubeconfig file, add it, and so forth. Now Lens will search for it.
Got it.
So that being said, let's actually jump into one of my clusters. Currently, I have two clusters going. We have a GKE cluster spinning, and we have a Minikube cluster up and running, right, directly onto Lens. Clicking into this cluster, I'm immediately brought into that overview screen where I can see how my cluster has been performing in the last hour, from the master to the worker node, CPU, memory, and so forth, right? And another very neat thing of this screen, this overview screen, is at the second half, the bottom half, we can get real-time warning messages and for our cluster itself. So here we can see I have two warnings: readiness probe failed, and I can click into this, and it's immediately going to bring me to that specific Kubernetes object that has this error message, right? And if I scroll down, we can see the error message and all of the details that are associated to it, right? The source, the count, and so forth, when it was seen. So another very, very important feature here that's going to help our operators, our site reliability engineers, understand very quickly what is happening with their Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah, the traceability of the events.
It's beautiful, exactly. And from here, let's talk about one thing real quick. We're going to talk about the smart terminal, which we touched on. So the terminal is here. Clicking into the terminal, we're immediately brought to a terminal. It's all automatically always downloading the latest and greatest kubectl version. So if I run a quick command saying kubectl version, we can see the version that the cluster is associated to. Jumping to my GKE cluster, running the terminal session, we can see it's always matching to that correct Kubernetes endpoint, right? Which is what we talked about in the demo slides. So this is really, that's where we're going to be able to work with multiple Kubernetes clusters at once. And
and
this is
and
that
this is
hot bar.
very powerful as an ops engineer, because not every time you're switching context between Kubernetes clusters, you're not changing the client versions, at least not all the time.
Exactly, exactly. Extremely useful. It's probably one of my favorite features within Lens, besides all of the other cool things. But that's really giving us that ability to take control of multiple Kubernetes clusters easily. One thing I want to point out here within my GKE cluster, we can see there's no metrics currently available, right?
Right.
Either I have that invalid Prometheus configuration or something's wrong. Well, what I can do is I can jump into my cluster settings. To do so, you just right click your cluster on the hotbar. Again, this is the hotbar on the left-hand side, that main navigation we talked about. Click settings, and there's several things we can do here. So first things first, within the settings, I can name my cluster, and I can also give it an image. So if I chose to do, let's just say type in catalog and see what I have on my desktop or computer. Maybe I don't have anything. Screenshot. Let's try that. Let's not use a GIF. Okay, let's just use this Lens background that we have here. So we're going to open this up, and it immediately gives us this icon, right? So if I'm closing out of my cluster settings, I can have all of these beautiful icons, new naming convention for this cluster, which is, I think this is more of a cool thing for the user experience, right? Where we know, like, hey, this is the cluster I want to work with based off of an image, compared to hovering over it, seeing it's my Minikube cluster and so forth. Going back to settings, you can view your proxy, namespaces. You can add namespaces. Now we talk about the metrics. We can see it's Prometheus Lens, right? So this is a Lens metrics. And the way it works really is, you take this, you go to Lens metrics, and you just enable all of these things here. And that's going to launch the Prometheus onto my cluster. So if I decided to check all of these things, I'm not going to do so for now, but if I decided to do so and I click apply, once we apply it, you give it a couple minutes and you will get the Prometheus brought to that cluster, which is so beautiful. And it's the same way we have this in our Minikube cluster here, right?
Right.
Excellent. Now we can take a look at the meat of Lens. And when I say the meat, I want to take a look at the overview screen here of all of our objects. So another very cool, interesting thing that Lens provides us is this color code on top of every single Kubernetes object, our pods, deployments, stateful sets, and so forth. Green is good, as we all know, green is good. But generally, if something is happening within one of my pods, for example, we'll see that they're all running here, but there'll also be a little error message showing up here, or a color code saying warning or red warning, right? And then I can always go and review that. So from here, I'm going to click into pods. And this is what's so beautiful, right? And if we go to GKE cluster, same thing, jump into my pods, many more pods here, I can immediately see all of my pods within my Kubernetes cluster, right? And the namespace it's associated to, what it's controlled by, the node, the status of the pod, right? And this is actually going to follow us through every single object within our cluster, right? And then I also have the ability to filter for just default, right? So I have my Nginx, go view it immediately. We don't have Prometheus set up, as we know, and we talked about, but even though we don't have it set up, we can click into it and immediately be given this beautiful interface that shows us all of the details about this pod, when it was created, the name, the namespace it's associated to, the labels, the annotations, right? Every single thing is accessible and viewable here. Now, if, for example, and we're going back to our Minikube cluster, as you guys can see, if, for example, I am a cluster administrator and I have all of the access control I can have, right? My role-based access control is given to me. I can do whatever I want to this cluster. There's actually some admin functions you can perform. So you can attach to the pod, you can shell into the pod, you can actually view the pod logs all in real time, right?
Nice.
You can see the health. It's beautiful. And then from here, you have the ability to actually search, right? And even filter if you choose to do so within your namespaces. And then I can download this directly to my operating system, give it a name, and ship it to somebody if I have to.
This is very powerful because it simplifies troubleshooting the Kubernetes cluster. Not obviously we have
Exactly.
other tools like Elk Stack and where you can look at the logs and stuff, but there's a lot of times you want to go and verify the logs of a specific pod or a container within a pod, get
Exactly.
the IP address of the pod, to verify some security rules or things like that, and it just makes your life easier.
Exactly. And you're spot on. It makes your life easier. It helps you troubleshoot. And again, this is all based off of your RBAC from your kubeconfig file. So we're always leveraging your role-based access control from your kubeconfig file. I think that's important to know.
Yeah.
Jumping back to my GKE cluster, we will unfilter. And I want to mention this actually, because, I once went nuts over this, to be honest with you. I filtered for a namespace back in the past, and I didn't realize that I was filtering for that specific namespace.
Yeah.
And I almost drove myself nuts because I knew there was specific objects within my cluster and I couldn't find them. I was literally going nuts. So I do want to mention this is like Excel, where if you filter, you have to uncheck.
Right.
It's just important
No,
to
it
know.
doesn't. It doesn't show the selected namespace up there.
It does up there. It
Oh
does
yeah.
up there, and that's a newer feature. But back in the past, this happened to me, I don't know, 8 months or so ago.
Yeah.
You select one, you didn't really always know until you clicked this and saw. So anyways, I want to make that
and
known.
I really like, it's a cool thing to see, like the number of containers with the green
Yes.
dots.
Yes, absolutely. It's and the reason why this user interface, right, and is so valuable to users is because to see something like this, you're gonna have to write some command line, right? If I want to see my pods or
Yeah.
all of the objects, right, I have to run some command line. We run it, and then I have this. Yeah, I mean, we all know how this is, but this is troublesome. I have to run some more inquiries. I have to do some more command lines to be able to view the
Yeah,
pods.
if I want to view a particular container is healthy or not inside a pod, then I have to write a different command with the -c to see the containers. But right now I'm getting a single shot view of the health of the containers in the same view as the pods.
Exactly. And again, guys, this follows us everywhere, right? Wherever we go, we have this ability to view these particular things. Jumping back to my Minikube cluster, same thing. I can view my deployments, daemon sets, stateful sets, replica sets, jobs, and so forth. Again, it follows us everywhere. And what I'm doing, and the reason I'm switching from cluster to cluster is to show how easy it is, right? Like, and that's why I switched from my Minikube back to my GKE and view the pods. It's just really emphasizing the aspect of taking control of your Kubernetes clusters, especially multiple of them.
Right.
Excellent. Another thing I want to demonstrate is actually something very cool, which is the ability to create resources directly into Lens, right? From here, we actually have some templates that we've built for our users. So I can deploy an Nginx deployment directly to my cluster through the create the resource functionality. So if I cancel this, you click this plus icon, terminal session or create resource, I can create a resource. I can select a template. We'll do a deployment, Nginx deployment.
Yeah, you
we'll
don't need
create
to. This is very cool. It just simplifies everything. Even you don't need to write a YAML file. You already have a template. You just extend it from there.
Exactly. Let's see on this cluster. I didn't have the correct permission.
Yeah, can you select the network policy just for the heck of it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, look at that. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, exactly. So super cool. And then you can deploy it. Another very interesting thing that Lens provides to us, and this is all because of Kubernetes, awesome technology, but if you have the correct permissions for your Kubernetes cluster, you can actually leverage Kubernetes to scale a deployment. So using the user interface of Lens, I can actually scale this deployment if I choose to do so. And I could scale it down, right? So we'll scale it, right now it's at 3, I'm gonna scale it down to 1. If I scroll down, it kills them, right? We just killed it. And
this
again,
is probably more useful for the devs, because they kind of want to restart a service or restart a service. They just scale it down to 0, scale it back up to 2 or 3, or they can increase the number of pods to see if the performance is better. Just helps them do quick debugs.
exactly. And that's what we spoke about in that presentation, right, earlier. You're spot on. It's so valuable. So, and then of course, right, if I chose to do so, boom, just scale it up. I'm not going to do so. I don't want to kill anything that's going on here, but yes, now one thing we haven't taken a look at is the ability to actually make configuration changes to a particular object or resource, right? So, and all based off of your RBAC, if I go into my pods, I can click this pencil icon and it's immediately going to open up the configuration and I can make changes all in real time.
It's an edit deployment. According to your command line, you can do an edit deployment and straight away do it on the cluster.
Yes. So we've taken a look at several different things now within Lens. We took a look at pre-built in Prometheus that we can see on our mini queue cluster. We took a look at the health of the cluster. We took a look at accessing multiple Kubernetes clusters, switching from cluster to cluster, the smart terminal, viewing the granular details of an object, and so forth. Now let's actually take a look at Helm charts and extensions, something we haven't talked about too much. So for Helm charts, they're very easy to access. In this application section here, you just click charts, and it's going to start pulling up all of the Helm charts for the repos that you've selected in your settings. So currently we can only see some repos here, maybe 5. But if I go to Lens, click Preferences, jump down to Kubernetes, this is where we can actually select from thousands of different repos, as we can see, and we can add custom ones if we choose to do so as well.
Nice.
So if I want to search for like a Mirantis one, we have it, right? Bitnami, very well-known one. Stable, another well-known one, and so forth. So I don't like to have too many of these selected. I just select the ones that I trust, the ones that I use. And then I can go to apps and charts, and I can actually go and find a particular chart that I care about, right? So I can do like a WordPress chart real quick and search for it. It's going to pull it up. What I love about this is it pulls up all of the details of the Helm chart, and we have these beautiful hyperlinks here as well that we can leverage, right? So if I want to learn more about this particular chart, I can click here. It's going to take me to the repo. We can learn it. We can read the README file and get a better understanding of everything about this Helm chart, right? Then I can click install. Does some cool things here. And then I would just click install directly to my cluster. Let's see what happens. We're installing it. And then the chart is created. We can view the releases. And once you review these releases, what's so neat about this is if I scroll down, I immediately see all of the resources that were deployed to our cluster. Service account, secrets, config, so forth. Yes.
It just also allows you to like understand the Helm chart, and I see an upgrade button right up there that can let you kind of upgrade to the recent version of that Helm chart, I guess.
Exactly. Spot on. Yeah. And again, these hyperlinks follow us everywhere. So if I want to view this config map, I just click it, immediately get the labels, the annotations, when it was created, all of the details necessary, right? And you can make changes and so forth. Boom. So that is Helm charts. You also have the ability to port forward through Lens as well. I don't think I actually have this running. Let's see what's going on. But you have the ability to port forward here as well. Yeah, I don't have it going right now, but you do have that ability if you choose to do so. And there's no endpoints, that's why. Yeah. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, no. Anyways, you do have that ability if you chose to do so as well, which is extremely neat. So that is Helm charts, extremely useful. You can deploy any type of repo or add your own repo if you choose to do so. Very, very cool. And that's deploying a Helm chart directly to our cluster within seconds, right? Minutes, not using any command line at all.
Nice.
From here, let's talk a little bit about extensions. Extensions are quite important to our users and ourselves. We touched on why they're important, so we won't do that right now. But what we will do is take a look at some extensions. So there's two things I want to mention. You can always see the documentation page here. Just clicking this button will bring us to our documentation. Oh, look, and WordPress port forward did work, right?
Okay.
We can see it here, actually.
Yeah.
Hello world. So very cool. I thought I was going crazy for a second. Anyways, so clicking onto these hyperlinks brings us to these very beautiful links. Whether you want to begin building an extension, or if you want to understand how these extensions work, you can do so here. What I want to do though is actually take a look at the available extensions. Currently, there's over 100 made extensions, but there's only about 15 publicly made extensions. Every extension on this GitHub repo has been vetted by Team Lens. We approve it. We say, yes, go ahead and use it. It's safe. That's extremely important to know. So long story short, click the resource map. It'll take you to this repo. Go to releases. You download it directly to your operating system. Coming back to Lens, you'll search for that particular download, and then you'll install it. I already have this one installed. This is actually one of my favorite extensions, which is the Kube Resource Manifest. And long story short, it shows us how all of our Kubernetes objects and resources are related to one another.
Right.
So to see that, let's go to my GKE cluster because it's a bigger cluster. And then we'll scroll down. Extensions are always at the bottom. So here we can see this resource map. We'll click into it. And we immediately are given this beautiful visualization, this beautiful chart that's going to show us how all of our resources are related to one another, and then details on them. And then, of course, we've talked about this. This follows us everywhere, right? Clicking into this object, this Damien set, viewing all the details, the labels, annotations, and so forth, right? So that was Helm charts, and that was extensions. One thing I didn't touch on, but we won't touch on this too much, is Lens does support custom resources like Istio and so forth. So you can always see these particular things. So these are all of my GKE custom resources as well.
Yeah, the Datadog agents.
Excellent. So we've talked about many, many different things here. The last thing I want to touch on is, again, here's your catalog. You can click into it very easily. Anything in your catalog can be pinned directly to our hotbar, right? Lens official blog. I can pin this to my hotbar, community Slack channel. I can pin it. Clicking this is what we talked about earlier. We get the ability to launch into our browser into a specific link, like you mentioned, services, for example, if you want to check something, or just like kubectl cheat sheet and codes and so forth. So you have that ability, and you would add your clusters here as well. Talking about hotbars, you can actually have several different hotbars. And these hotbars are extremely important to our users. And the reason for this is I can have a hotbar that's made specifically for production clusters. Meaning if I navigate to number 2, everything in this hotbar would be my production grade clusters.
Got it.
Right? And you can name them and so forth. Extremely valuable, extremely important. Last thing is Lens Spaces. Cloud-based centralized offering here. Long story short, you can create a space. So you're not alone, join the party. You log in. This is the only thing that you need a login for. It's centralized. So everything else within Lens, no need for a login. It's 100% open source, so forth. If I log into my space, and I'll do this really, really quickly. We're immediately logged in. Navigating back to Lens, we can see my name here. And you can see these spaces that I'm a part of already, right? And within these spaces, there's actually specific Kubernetes clusters that live within them. So these are spaces that have been shared by my colleagues. And then if I
Okay.
went to clusters, you can always view those shared spaces.
So if you click on one of these spaces, what do you see? Like, is that a cluster?
So no. So you'll only see the settings of this particular space. The space is always ran by the administrator of the space. Now, if you would like, if you have Lens running, I can actually create and very easily create a space. Let's actually do this really, really quickly. Edwards, let's just call it that. That's fine. Blah, blah, blah. Clicking into here, I can click to open it. It's going to take us to our settings. We would go to invite new members. I can invite people by either username or email or even a link.
Okay.
If I chose this, I could grab this link, I can send it to you, and you'll be able to get access to this space. Having access to this space means nothing right now. But if I go to my GKE cluster and click this share icon on the top right corner, I would select the space that I want to share it to, this one.
Mm-hmm.
I would install Cluster Connect, which is the technology behind Lens Spaces. Long story short, it creates a proxy between the desktop computer and the Kubernetes API. From here, we have now just installed Cluster Connect to my cluster. I can share the cluster to that space.
Okay.
Let's see what happened here. Catalog. And we can see that there's two GKE clusters now, but the labels are different. One is a space, right? So here's that GKE cluster that would be shared to with that space. So now if I gave you that link that I created earlier and you went to Lens or you went to that link, signed up, did all of these things, you would actually have access to this Kubernetes cluster. You'll have read only. You won't be able to do any admin functions. But me being a cluster administrator, I can actually provide you with much more granular permissions. And that's what we saw. Go ahead.
So, and with spaces, would I see all the metrics and all of the dashboard visualization that we see as a normal cluster with the spaces too?
Yes, you would be able to if you have the correct permissions.
Okay. If you have read only, then you'll be allowed to see what you can see.
Correct. So yeah, and that is Lens Spaces, catalog, hotbar, and so forth. So as we just demonstrated, you're able to really get that full situational awareness of all things Kubernetes while working with multiple Kubernetes clusters.
Hey, thank you, Ed. This has been super helpful, and I'm so excited to try Lens and try Spaces. I just want to kind of jump and dig in, and since it's open source, I'm gonna hit you up with a few questions, and if there's a chance for me to contribute somewhere, my team will be excited as well. And I'm going to recommend Lens just for anybody who is starting off on Kubernetes, because I feel that it solves like the complexity. That means it helps anybody who is learning about Kubernetes. It helps with troubleshooting, it helps with development, it helps with observability. I think definitely there's a huge space for this tool. And I'm going to see how I can leverage it, and we'll do more sessions on Lens in the future.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you for inviting me today to have this conversation. It was extremely fun, very informative for me. You know quite a lot about this stuff already, more than me, to be honest with you, but this was a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate the time today. And let's connect and let's talk, and maybe we build some extensions.
Thank you, Ed. That's pretty much it from Intera's an introduction to Lens. Thank you, Ed. See you later.